Hello, welcome everyone. We're so delighted to have you join us today. We're going to just take a moment to begin the webinar. We're really glad that you're joining us today for the Introducing Positively Happier, a Positive Psychology Intervention webinar. It's really a joy to be with you all today, wherever you're coming in from. The Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center received 6 years of funding to enhance the capacity of behavioral health workforce and school mental health services workforce. The MHTTC provides training and technical assistance focused on evidence-based practices for people with serious mental health conditions, covering a variety of topics. All of our services are provided for free and are in English, and we have Spanish services as well. We need your feedback. So at the end, we will be having a survey. We really appreciate you taking the moment to fill out that survey. It helps us give information to SAMHSA. We are recording this and it will be up on our webinar. Please note that this presentation was prepared for the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. At the time of this presentation, Dr. Miriam Delphin Rittman served as Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use at SAMHSA. The opinions expressed herein are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services or SAMHSA. No official support or endorsement of DHHS or SAMHSA for the opinions described in this presentation is intended or should be inferred. We try to use affirming, respectful, recovery-oriented language in all of our activities. And I'm delighted to encourage you to think about our upcoming virtual conference, which is coming up already in September 18th, a spotlight on emotional well-being. We're going to have some wonderful speakers, including one of our speakers today, Dr. Tony Zippel, and we'll cover such topics as self-care, organizational wellness, DBT, research approaches to mental health services, and motivational interviewing. And we'll have a school mental health track and service simultaneous Spanish translation and English Sign Language. So please join us. All of that is free. You can check it out using that link there. Let me tell you about our presenters today. Caitlin Mitchell is a senior training and consultation specialist in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions at Rutgers University. Her background in clinical mental health practice informs her work as part of a statewide performance improvement initiative targeting the acute care system for individuals in need of crisis or emergency services. Caitlin is currently pursuing her PhD with a focus on applications of positive psychology for people living with serious mental health conditions. We also have Dr. Tony Zippel, who is an executive in residence at the University of Louisville School of Public Health and Information Sciences, who consults, teaches, and coaches in areas related to personal happiness, resilience, and organizational health. A licensed psychologist, he received his doctorate from Boston University, his MBA from the University of New Hampshire, and holds multiple certifications in positive psychology, happiness studies, coaching, and positive neuroplasticity. And I'm Michelle Zechner, an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions at Rutgers. I teach and am involved in clinical research, intervention development, and program evaluation to support health and wellness for people diagnosed with serious mental health conditions, specializing in people aging with those conditions. I've utilized positive psychology concepts in workforce development initiatives, in the coordination of a pilot study of the Positively Happier program, and in the development of an undergraduate resilience strategies and psychiatric rehabilitation course at Rutgers. So that's who we are. We're going to hear from you in a moment. What we hope to accomplish today is tell you a little bit about the Positively Happier program philosophy, a little bit of an overview, give you some sense of the materials, structure, and strategies, talk about the implementation of the program and how that might look in different settings. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin for our grounding activity.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. So to get us started this morning, we're going to try one of the focusing activities from the Positively Happier program. This is a simple exercise that might help you feel calmer or more grounded, and it'll also give you a sense of some of the activities that are included in the manual. So I invite you to participate this morning to your level of comfort. This exercise is called 3 breaths, and it can help us let go of our distractions and focus on being here now. And so when you're ready, sit upright with your back supported and your feet on the ground. Place your hands in a comfortable position and gently close your eyes, or if you're more comfortable, allow your gaze to go softly down towards the floor. If at any point you feel uncomfortable with this breathing practice, you can just return to breathing as you normally would. Now take a slow, deep, comfortable breath in. Feel your stomach expand as you breathe in, and try to hold your breath for a few seconds. When you're ready, slowly exhale and say to yourself, relax. Take a second, slow, deep breath in. Again, feeling your stomach expand fully as you breathe in, and hold your breath for a few seconds. Then, as you exhale, say to yourself, I am here. Take a third, slow, deep breath in. Again, feel your stomach expand fully as you breathe in, and hold your breath for a few seconds if you can. Then, as you exhale, say to yourself, I am calm. Now let your breathing return to normal, and as it does, open your eyes and rejoin the group. A moment just to reflect on how that experience was for you. I'm going to ask some questions, and you can feel free to enter your responses in the chat. First, what did it feel like for you to focus on your breathing? Calming, relaxing, grounding. That's great to hear. Slowed your mind. What other phrases do you think might be helpful to use, either along with or instead of the ones we used today, which were relax, I am here, and I am calm? Release, I'm okay. Thank you for my life. I'm safe. These are great. I'm present. And finally, when do you think it might be helpful for you to use a breathing practice like this? Throughout the day, yeah, really no wrong time, I think, to use a practice like this in between clients, any occasion, before a meeting. Well, that's great. I'm glad you all had a good experience. We thank you for your participation in the exercise and your feedback. And I hope this sense of calm remains with you as we continue through the webinar this morning.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And just as a hint, this activity is actually one of the activities that's included in the Positively Happier manual. So we wanted to give you sort of that experiential moment of some of what is included in the manual. Welcome again. I'm so glad that all of you are here today. I could see from the chat that many of you have already introduced yourselves, but if you'd like to, take a moment in the chat to indicate what your role is or your setting, and where are you geographically. A lot of you are doing that. Some of us from the MHTTC, we're in central and northern New Jersey. I know that Tony, Dr. Zippel, is coming to us from Louisville, Kentucky. Where are you coming from so that we can see? Oh my gosh, I see lots of folks coming from all over. We've got people from Texas, New York City, Florida, Missouri. Wow, welcome. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Washington State, you all got up early for us. Thank you. That's lovely. It's a lot of dedication. Well, thank you. It's so great to see Indiana, Virginia, Delaware. Wow. Georgia. Nebraska, holy cow, that's wonderful. Oregon, South Carolina, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Idaho, oh, Boise, wow. Lovely to see all of you. We're so glad you're here today. And now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Zippel to talk a little bit more about the philosophy of Positively Happier.
Thanks, Michelle, and great to be here with everyone. This has been something that's been slowly evolving, I think, in the field of rehabilitation and recovery. There's a really large and growing base of information about positive psychology and the impact that it has, helping us to have higher levels of emotional well-being, psychological well-being, physical health, life expectancy. But so much of that information has never made its way into the field of recovery and psychiatric rehabilitation. And I think that's sad for two reasons. One is because we've got a large base of research that says it really works. And if we think this is really helpful in the general population, why wouldn't it be helpful for people with disabilities or people in recovery? The second thing is that it is also a non-stigmatizing construct for doing this kind of work. We've been concerned for a long time as a field, I think, about the issue of stigma. And as empowering as rehabilitation is and recovery is, they're still centered around separating people out who have special illnesses, and we're going to do special things for you for your special illness or disability. Working on happiness is something that's universal. It's something that all of us have an interest in and all of us want to do. And so we can all learn to be happier. And by learning to be happier, we can improve every psychological outcome, emotional outcome, and physical outcome. So I think that happiness ought to be a legitimate and primary goal for all of us in the work that we do with our clients as well as in our own lives. Shall we do the next slide? So as I said, it starts with the assumption that every person wants to be happier and deserves to be happier. I just finished a session in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I asked the question for the group, who in the group wants to be happier? And every hand goes up because no matter how happy you are today, wouldn't it be better to be a little bit happier tomorrow, right? So we all want and deserve to be happier. It's a good in and of itself, something that we all want to do. And as I mentioned, it also has great implications for our physical, psychological, and emotional health. It improves outcomes, doesn't fix everything, doesn't solve all the problems in our life, but it makes it easier for us to deal with all of those problems. It doesn't solve all of our physical health problems, but it makes it easier to deal with those physical health problems, increases immune response, increases our ability to deal with those challenges in front of us. And in and of itself, it's not recovery, but it makes recovery more possible. It makes it easier. It gives people higher purpose around that chase for recovery, a desire to be happier. So it's a process and not a destination. The other thing that I think is important in this and in all the work that we've done around this is that we start with the assumption that being happier is dependent on the choices that people make. We know that about 50%, and this is based on work that Sonia Lyubomirsky has done, about 50% of our level of happiness is the choices that we make. About 40% of it is genetic, and most of us can't do too much about that. I know that all of my dour German ancestors on both sides of the family impose some limits on my own personal happiness. But if I can control and manage 50% of it, if I can make choices in that whole other half of my path to happiness that's going to move me towards a higher level of happiness, that goal of being happier, man, that's big. If you had 50% odds of doing better and you were playing the tables in Atlantic City, you'd be there day in and day out. It's a really big opportunity to win. And one other thing I think is worth mentioning, specifically about the manual. You'll hear a little bit more about how it's organized, but one of the things that we wanted to do in it is to give lots of strategies for being happier. And there's nothing that we talk about in the manual that works for everyone. But everybody I think that you'll work with can find something in that array of interventions that's going to really connect for them so that everybody not only can make a choice about being happier, everybody can find practical, workable, research-based strategies that will help them get there, even though any particular strategy isn't necessarily the right strategy for everyone. But we think there's enough choice in it that everybody can find something that works for them. Michelle, you're on mute.
Thank you. I have a lot of strengths, but unmuting is not always the best strength that I have. Thank you so much, Tony. And I think that it's so powerful. You know, Tony is the lead author on the manual and has been an absolute visionary over the years and such an inspiration to me and so many other folks about the importance of including these positive psychology interventions in our work with people with serious mental health conditions and in our work with anyone really. There's just so much evidence that they're helpful with people. So I have a poll. I'm kind of curious. I suspect we may be speaking a little bit to the choir today. I'd love to know if you have used any of these positive psychology concepts in your work before. I gave some example of the idea of happiness, but also resilience, grit, strengths, well-being might be another way to think about it, or flourishing. I'm just kind of curious. I suspect that many of you have, and as the answers come flying in, I do see about 90% of the people who have responded have in fact used these these concepts somehow in their work, and that's really exciting to see. So we'll end the poll in just a second. But I see that people are also savoring and gratitude. Lovely. Yeah, some other great examples of that. And I always turn to, maybe you all are familiar with this too, the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley has some lovely concepts for different applications. But thank you very much. I'm going to end the poll now. We looks like we've got about 92% of the folks who answered have used some of these concepts. 2% said no, and 6% are unsure. Thank you for participating in our poll. And I will share the results. You can see how that the breakdown of that is. All right, so let's talk a little bit now about the Positively Happier manual. There are 15 sessions in the manual. We're really excited. I love the manual. I think that the activities, the experiential component was so powerful. It really gave everyone and gives people an opportunity of the tools and skills they might need to build their happiness. To think about it, you know, I always think about happiness as sort of like roller coasters, balloon rides, and carnivals, but really when you dig into it, right, and into the science, there's so much more to it. It's these small actions that we can take every day that build sort of more of a sense of meaning and purpose and joy and connection. So our manual is 15 sessions. The topics include things like an introduction to happiness and to the program. What are the foundations of happiness? Exploring personal strengths, identifying those in ourselves and others. Thinking about mindfulness and connection, meaning and purpose. Also noting happiness and physical self. Tony mentioned that briefly, but there's so much evidence that things like nutrition, exercise, sleep, and touch are really critical for our sense of happiness and well-being. Also leaning into some of the intellectual components and uh, pieces of how we feel happier, thinking about developing our curiosity and a sense of grit and stick-to-itiveness. Also thinking about happiness and our relationship with ourself. Are we kind? Are we self-compassionate with ourselves? Those relationships with others, our social connections, so powerful. There's so much evidence that our relationships are predictive of our feelings of happiness. Also, looking at emotional self, things like gratitude and kindness, building happiness habits, which is so important. And we use the framework, which you may have heard, called WOOP, which is wish, obstacle, outcome, and plan. And that is really a fun way to think about how to build the happier habits into everyday practice, which I think is really, again, what I find so helpful and different about this particular program is the experiential part of the group, which is, similar you actually do practice things in the group, and then you're invited to try those things out in the week or weeks between one session and the next. We do use a facilitator script, so there is a script the facilitator can use to follow and orient and engage participants. The content's been written, we aimed for about the sixth grade reading level, and it includes many open-ended questions and opportunities for discussion. We got some feedback, so we did pilot a version of the manual. We got a lot of wonderful feedback, and one of the important pieces of feedback was to try to make the reading level a bit more accessible, so we tried to do that. And each session includes a participant handout that's built into the session. So it's about 6 to 8 pages each session, and that includes 1 page of a participant handout that can be reviewed verbally or provided directly to the participant. It just takes a lot of steps to work on building greater happiness, and those research-based ideas and practices that Tony mentioned that have been studied and used and effective in a lot of different populations. Things like practicing gratitude, like thanking someone or making sure that you thank multiple people in the day, or making sure alternately that you get enough sleep, that you focus on your sleep, because there's a direct correlation between sleep and happiness. Maybe you know this from your own life. I know that this is true for me. um, Also, things like practicing self-compassion. So each session, the materials kind of have organizing principles. There's a focusing activity which starts us out, which I give you, we gave you an example. The breathing exercise at the very beginning of today's session was an example of one of our focusing activities, and that typically involves a simple breath or mindfulness practice, and we tie it into happiness. Tony has done an amazing job cultivating many of these activities that really focus on the topic at hand, whether that be strengths or sleep or intellectual well-being, and connecting that to the session of the day. So that's the focusing activity. Then the next phase of the session is the topic overview, which is just reviews generally the main points from the previous section and introduces the new topic. The participant handout is kind of the meat of the matter, and that's where the new information and content is delivered. We encourage, we encourage folks to print out the participant handout to give that to participants so that they could refer back to it later. And some of the exercises build on each other, so it's helpful for participants to have something. And some people, thinking about adult learning, some of us really need that piece of paper and a pencil in our hand to think and learn. I know I'm one of those people. Other people really need to hear it. Other people need to talk about it. Other people need to practice it. And some people need to do all of those things. So we encourage that to make the participant handout as engaging as we can. Then we get to the let's try it out section, and that's the experiential activity that really is included to encourage discussion and application in the person's life. I'm just thinking about the let's try it out. One of the activities is to think about all of the people that you interact in a day that it creates a positive feeling. So we ask participants to think about, and it's a great activity for all of us to think about, who do we interact with in a day, and where are those positive interactions. And what often happens is we find that there are a lot more interactions than we notice because we don't always notice them. I always give the example, my husband always gives me a hard time, but when I'm at the grocery store, I'm like, hey, how are you, to the clerk, how's it going? Those are positive interactions, and it's a tiny thing, but when we build those up and we notice them, that can really improve our mood. It can help us feel happier. So that's an example of the let's try it out. Then we offer a practice on your own. And that's just a simple strategies that we offer to encourage participants to try something out at home between the sessions that relate to the topic. You all will laugh because this used to be called homework. Guess what? People hated it. We got lots and lots of feedback. I mean, I'm in education. We talk about homework all the time with my students. However, adults do not love that topic, particularly people in, a group or, trying to think about happiness. It does not bring them happiness. I understand. So we called it practice on your own. And then in the last phase, it's the session wrap up. And that is really sort of a quick summary of what we learned in that session, and then a breathing practice tailored again to the topic to kind of end the situation, end the whole session, and asking people to reflect on what they learned in that session. Of course, we need good facilitation strategies, such as creating an encouraging and hopeful environment, asking open-ended questions, kindness and empathy, and working to link those participants. It can be very, very helpful. I will say that although anyone can and should be using the materials, we had an eye to folks who'd used some kind of intervention with people in the past. And if someone is a new facilitator, it would certainly probably be helpful to get some clinical supervision about strategies for good group management, etc., or individual management. So let's talk a little bit about the content. So we're offering a sneak peek preview of the manual today, and I chose two different sessions. So on the left, you'll see session 3. It's called At a Glance, and that is an orienting page for the facilitator, and it offers a brief description of the session, and then it gives you some practical tools, such as like, what do you need to prepare for this session? You need to review the materials. You need to maybe print out some of the handouts, and sometimes the session preparation for a particular session may include, think about how this applies in a particular setting, whether it's, I see we've got some folks from the state hospitals, or if it's a peer service or substance use or something like that. Think about how it actually relates to the people that you're talking to, because we certainly want to make it as applied as possible. There's also a section for needed materials. Often that might be the handouts, but it could be paper and pens, flip charts. Sometimes in some of the sessions, we encourage the use of music, or we may ask for an audio clip or video clip or something like that. And that's going to be included in the needed materials. And then a section on session considerations. And this kind of gives you some notes about what to expect in the session quickly, and anything you need to prepare. Like, for example, in session 3, there's an activity that asks people to sit in their chair and have their arms out to their side. Well, then the facilitator may want to rearrange the chairs so there's a little more space if possible. And some sort of hints and strategies to overcome any potential challenges for that particular session. I know I've run a lot of groups, both inpatient and outpatient, and in wellness centers. So I know that you don't always have a lot of time to prepare for a group. But what I think is really helpful about the At a Glance is it kind of condenses all of the what do you need to know quickly in bullet form, and we hope that that would give you an orientation. I also wanted to highlight the session 1 handout. This is one of my personal favorite handouts, which is why I really wanted to include a picture of it. And that's from session 1, Why Be Happier? And it goes over some of the factors that are important in terms of our sense of happiness and how we feel happier. So each of the sessions will include a handout for participants that will have, some nice graphics and be laid out kind of simply. We've tried to limit them mostly to 1 page, although sometimes we get very excited and they're 2 pages. Yeah, so that gives you kind of a sense of what some of the materials look like. I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin now for thoughts about implementation.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak now a little bit about how to implement the Positively Happier program and what it might look like in your particular setting. First, I want to emphasize that no two settings or even two individuals are the same. So it's important for you to consider the unique needs of your participants and your setting. So while we're making some recommendations for how to implement the Positively Happier program, it is okay for you to make some adjustments based on what will best serve your participants. So Positively Happier can be delivered in individual one-on-one sessions, or it can be delivered in a group format. We recommend not having a group size larger than 8 participants, but again, this may vary depending on the individuals in your group. You might find that having 8 participants is too many to allow for meaningful engagement with the material. So this is something that you'll need to consider beforehand when you're starting your program. Whether you decide to move forward with individual or group format, it's important to remember that Positively Happier is not designed as a therapy program or replacement for mental health treatment. So the sessions are more educational and applied in nature rather than therapy groups which the participants might have experienced in the past. But because of this, you might choose to use an open group rather than a closed group format since the program isn't therapeutic in nature. An open group format would allow participants to join at any time throughout the program, rather than requiring that all the participants choose to join at the beginning. You might also consider having one facilitator run the entire program, or using teams of 2 who could either co-facilitate each session or alternate sessions. All of these choices might offer different benefits in different settings or with different participants. Each of the sessions in the Positively Happier program has been designed to take about an hour. This includes all of the activities that Michelle just told you about as part of the structure of each session, as well as the opportunity for participants to ask questions or offer reflections on the material. It's likely that some of the concepts in the Positively Happier program will be new to some of the participants. So it's really important to allow enough time for discussion and real thorough understanding of the material, especially with how it applies specifically to the lives of your participants. So offering those relevant real-world examples may help the participants connect more personally to the information. We recommend completing one session of the Positively Happier program each week. As I just mentioned, it is okay to take additional time to explain the material. Depending on the needs of your participants, you might need to break up the content and cover it in more than one session, especially if the ideas are particularly unfamiliar or challenging. It's really more important to make sure that the pace of the program meets the needs of your participants. Another strategy you might consider, and what we saw in our pilot with the agency that helped us, is offering review or process meetings in between sessions. This can be done individually or as a group, and it would really serve as a refresher on the material, an opportunity for deeper discussion and understanding of the concepts. And it can also serve as a check-in for how that practice on your own activity is going, and figuring out if the participants need any reminders or additional support or adaptations around that activity that they're practicing between sessions. In other settings, such as inpatient, where the activities tend to be a bit more condensed, you might offer 2 sessions per week. Again, it's going to depend on your specific setting and the needs of your participants. And finally, we recommend following the session sequence that is presented in the manual. So we really worked hard to design a step-by-step introduction to concepts from positive psychology, and each session builds on information and skills that were included in the previous sessions. We do include a review of pertinent information when it's needed for a given session, so that if somebody did miss a session, they'll be oriented to whatever they need. But we really feel that following the manual in the order that it's written will help the participants have a deeper and more cohesive understanding of the material. So after you've made the decisions about the format and the schedule for the Positively Happier program in your setting, there are some additional strategies and tools that can help you succeed. One of these is using a session checklist as a fidelity measure. So this is a useful instrument for facilitators to help them keep track of the structure of each section, making sure that they're completing all of the components. And it also allows facilitators to know any successes or challenges that they encountered as they're implementing this new program. Another strategy for the successful rollout of the Positively Happier program is to consider using evidence-based implementation frameworks. One of these is the EPIS framework, which stands for Exploration, Preparation, Implementation, and Sustainment. So the EPIS framework is a widely recognized model for guiding the implementation of new practices in a variety of settings, including behavioral health programs. It begins with the exploration phase, which would include assessing the specific needs of the population that you serve, engaging with staff and other key stakeholders to gather their insights and increase buy-in. You might also want to address how the philosophy of the Positively Happier program, which Tony went over, aligns with the mission and the values of your agency and setting. Next, the preparation phase involves developing a really detailed plan that would address resources that you need, training for staff, really setting up the infrastructure to support the Positively Happier program, as well as planning for how to address any barriers that may arise, which does sound a little bit like that WHOOP strategy that Michelle mentioned, where you're planning for the outcome and the obstacles. The third phase is implementation, which is the actual rollout of the Positively Happier program according to your plan. So this includes any ongoing training and support to the staff involved with the program, as well as making adjustments as they're needed as you go along. And the final phase, sustainment, is working towards continued integration of the program into the agency's standard practices moving forward. Another implementation framework, which you might be familiar with, is the Plan, Do, Study, Act, or PDSA model. The PDSA model is a cyclical approach used for continuous, so ongoing improvement in implementing new programs or changes in behavioral health settings. So it starts with the plan phase. Again, this involves identifying the problem or gap, setting goals and objectives for what you'd like to accomplish, outlining the steps to implement the program, and then determining how you'll measure the success of the program. So thinking about things like, what data will you collect? How will you assess any changes that have occurred, whether they're positive or negative? In the do phase, the program is implemented on a small scale. So the focus is really on testing the plan in practice to identify any challenges or barriers. Then during the study phase, you review and analyze the data that you collected and solicit feedback from stakeholders such as the participants and the facilitators of the Positively Happier program. And finally, the ACT phase relies on the insights from the study phase to help you refine and improve the program. You can make any necessary adjustments and then begin planning the next cycle of the program based on that information. Now, when evaluating your Positively Happier program, you may want to consider looking at things like happiness, hope, quality of life, self-efficacy, and even participant and facilitator satisfaction, because we do expect that the facilitators will have a good time engaging in this program, but they also might benefit as well from learning some of the skills and practicing those happiness strategies. The University of Pennsylvania Positive Psychology Center has a repository of questionnaires that may be helpful. So links to supplemental materials for the EPIS framework, the PDSA model, and the UPenn Positive Psychology Center will be included in the additional resources slide from this webinar. And next, we'd like to share some feedback from an amazing organization, CCC Housing, which is a provider of supported housing in New Jersey. CCC tried out an earlier version of the Positively Happier program in their setting. We helped them with a program evaluation of that experience. And as Michelle mentioned, they gave us great suggestions about refinements to the program. So now you'll hear from one of the incredible facilitators as she reflects on her experience with the Happier program.
Hello everyone, my name is Maggie and I work for CCC Housing. I co-facilitated the Happier groups at one of the locations that CCC owns in their community room. The groups lasted for about an hour and a half, and the participants, their age range was between about 40 to about 69 years old. These participants have been in and out of groups majority of their adult lives and have felt in the past that they have received everything that they could have possibly gotten from their previous groups. Which brings me into the first thing that I really enjoyed about the Happier study, which is regardless of diagnosis, the manual could be used as kind of like an extension to additional treatment. It's not just a treatment to be used instead of the normal psychoeducation or symptom reduction groups. It's a group kind of to take you beyond. It really focuses on the mental, physical, emotional, and health aspects of wellness altogether, which is really enjoyable. And most groups, I feel like, don't necessarily do that. Another one of the things that I really enjoyed about the Happier group was one of the assignments that the participants participated in. It was called the Circle of Connection. The participants would create a circle and they would list the people that they would interact with basically on a daily level or on a day-to-day basis. No matter how big or how small, you could include maybe the barista from your local coffee shop. So long as the person had a positive impact on them, you would put them in the circle. Eventually, you would put them in the circle and you would also write down some positive attributes of that connection. The participants would eventually close their eyes and think about those positive connections and how they would physically feel thinking about those connections. And what I really enjoyed about this assignment was that it allowed people to think outside of their traditional sense of like friends and family and really just go into the people who that they might see on a day-to-day that they would not consider being a close contact and seeing how that person made them feel. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about it was one of the group participants actually mentioned, while I'm thinking about them and saying this is what I enjoy about their interaction, that person is probably thinking the same thing and they could say it back to me, which to me felt like that just is so amazing because that's another way to increase a person's self-esteem, which I thought it was amazing because I didn't think about that at all in the assignment. So I thought that was a great point. Another thing that impacted me about that one assignment is one of the participants had really been going back and forth, debating on joining the church band. He really wanted to, but was unsure. He wanted to meet new people, but really was hesitant and very nervous about it. And in the upcoming weeks, right after that, he decided to actually join that. And I have to attribute it somewhat to this assignment. And I think that that is such a beautiful thing because it really highlighted how important it is to have people in your lives that so much share the same interests and how easy it would be to build those connections and interpersonal relationships so long as you have someone that shares those some similar connections. So I do have to say I really did enjoy that. And I think that the Happier group really is beneficial to people. And I found myself participating in a lot of the assignments on my own time. And again, utilizing positive psychology is just a great aspect to have in this. And I thank you for your time.
Yes, it was really great to hear from Maggie and her experience using the materials and also with the participants. I love that she brought up the example of social connections because, you know, there is this epidemic of social isolation that we all are facing and has such an impact on our happiness. So I hope that you enjoyed that as well. I think this covers a little bit of where Caitlin went, but you know, we were thinking about Positively Happier and how it could be utilized in diverse settings, thinking about participants. You know, it could be helpful in a group because groups are so, well, they're the way that many of us in behavioral health settings offer services, right? Our groups as a cost-effective way, but it's also a great way to enhance social connections for people. They also can model for one another and experience and see what other people are doing. So groups are really helpful, but some people do not respond well to groups and prefer an individual tailored sort of intervention, and that would really be benefited. You know, it would give a deeper discussion ability, also maybe more appropriate for people who have more specific needs that are unique or different. You know, someone who's experienced a lot of trauma or substance use or maybe speaks another language. So there are considerations when you think about how you would offer it in a different setting. The facilitators definitely could be sort of a range of folks. In our pilot, most of the folks who, and I think some might be here today, hey, Triple C, um, some of many of the facilitators had a bachelor's degree in some type of mental health background and had worked in the field for a little bit. Not a lot of group experience. Some of the facilitators were master's prepared. I think peers definitely. I think, I always think I've done a lot of work in hospital settings, and I was sort of thinking who would be sort of an ideal delivery kind of facilitator. And I think it's really anyone who has a hopeful attitude, who really wants to engage people and connect with people. But I could totally see rehab staff, case managers, social workers, psychologists, counselors. I think even chaplains would be a wonderful, or even folk rehab, supported employment folks, because when you think about employment and the connections that we make and need, it's really, really relevant there as well. So anyone really could be a facilitator of the material with some support. You may need to consider the adaptations if you were to use this material in your setting, thinking about housing. One issue that we learned having piloted in a housing setting is that some people weren't always comfortable with their neighbors knowing their business. So, that might lend itself to sort of a different way of thinking about it. Or it could mean that you include more examples about housing and how does housing relate to happiness. So thinking about that application of the particular setting um, and the person. Also, I think that additional adaptations might be helpful thinking about substance use. So for folks in recovery and 12-step programs, including that language in the sessions, I think would bolster it, would make it more meaningful, would make it more relevant for the individuals. That's not to say that, it wouldn't be relevant as it is, but just sort of try to think, how different folks would use this. I've delivered groups in inpatient, outpatient, in wellness centers. I've done a lot of groups, and sort of thinking about how you know who you work with. Some folks may have a little more challenges cognitively, and so you may need to take a slower pace at things, or they maybe some literacy issues. So you may have to consider that. And Caitlin gave some great examples of inpatient modifications that might be helpful, like having a couple of sessions a week, or, in the pilot, one group tried out having, a session, and then a follow-up session was really just to sort of apply the learning to their lives. And I thought, well, that's a pretty cool adaptation, which could be used as well, is to sort of, let's just have an informal group where we talk about what we talked about, and how that would look like in your life. If you're thinking about social connections, have you been thinking about your social connections? What happened yesterday? What happened today? Who were the social connections that you connected as well? So you may need to consider the primary function of what you do. I saw in our chat, we've got folks, justice involved as well. That may look very different in terms of how do you get your social connections? What does that look like? Folks working with children or youth, that might also, just the setting may lend itself to slightly different vocabulary. But the concepts, I think, are very, very applicable and universal, as Tony has said. We tried to make sure that the examples and information would be relevant to people experiencing mental health symptoms and challenges with social determinants of health, like poverty, housing challenges, stigma, and discrimination. So we hope that you are as excited about Positively Happier program as we are. We've just, Caitlin and Tony and I and we've been immersed in it for the past 2 years, and it's just been very exciting. But we'd also like to tell you about a research project opportunity. We are seeking organizations who'd like to implement the program at their site and participate in a formal program evaluation. This research will include the manual, additional training, and implementation supports at no cost. We would ask that organizations commit to using the materials at their location, tracking and recording outcomes, sharing de-identified data with us. Then we'll evaluate that and analyze it and offers summary information to each organization about outcomes at their location and a summary of the overall project. If you'd like to participate in this research opportunity, please complete this Qualtrics survey using the QR code on the screen. If you'd like to be notified when the manual is available, please complete the Qualtrics survey on the screen. So the Qualtrics survey basically has two questions. It says, would you like to be notified? We've been working very hard on the manual. We're very hopeful it will be ready soon. And the Qualtrics survey says, would you like to be notified when it's available? Yes, no. Would you like more information about the research opportunity? Yes, no. So we invite you to take our survey. We will not share your information. You do have to provide your name or an email so that we can reach out to you. That's really to help us keep track. And we will be following up shortly about the manual and the information. So I don't know if there are any questions. Oh, okay. Could someone put the link? Thank you so much. Katya is just putting the link to the Qualtrics in the chat. So you can either use your phone to do that, or we've just dropped that in the chat. Okay, very cool. And then let's see. Now's our opportunity for questions and answers. We've got the amazing Dr. Zippel with us, Caitlin and myself. We'd love to hear any questions. I know a lot of you have questions about the manual. I think I've gone over that. But are there any other questions about the content, about the process, about positive psychology use in the population that you are curious about? We'd love to hear from you.
So Michelle and presenters, there is a question. I work with LGBTQIA Two-Spirit plus youth ages 13 to 24 who have housing instability, high levels of trauma, substance use, and isolation. What recommendations do you have for facilitating this to a group like them?
Tony, I'm gonna ask if you want to take a stab at that. I have thoughts, and Caitlin, if you have thoughts. Tony, can you hear us? Tony may have.
I'll just say that I think it is enormously applicable. One of the things I think is important about this is the universality of the principles and the content and the strategies and these kinds of approaches to life that they're important for all of us. And no, I don't think that there's any limitation to applying it to a group like that. One thought about it is that you need to, as Michelle was saying, work really hard to make this relevant and make it fit with the audience that you're delivering it to. And so knowledge of the particular challenges that people face and how these things apply in their situation, I think really make it live more. I also love the idea of co-facilitators. After you've done this, or even the first time you do it, you may have a client in that group who has a real interest and ability at delivering this kind of content to peers. We've all done lots of work around peer education, peer support, peer specialists. They can play a really critical role in helping to deliver this and make it real and accessible and relevant. So I might consider something like that as well in the delivery of it.
Thanks, Tony. Caitlin, anything you want to add? No? Okay. I also was just thinking about particularly for that I mean, for any population really that has very specific experience. I mean, very, difficult and a lot of similar experiences. I would really recommend thinking about some examples, making sure that for each session that you're thinking about what that would look like for in a person. Like what pops to my mind, for example, is in the strengths session, there's a list of strengths that that get reviewed, and then making some examples like for the LGBTQI plus Two Spirit plus youth, thinking, perseverance may be a really, really important strength that should be leaned into for the population. Thinking, you've been through a lot, you can go through a lot. So trying to apply it and using examples like, when you got kicked out of the house, you use that strength of perseverance, or making it as applicable in a way. And I think Tony's suggestion of having a peer co-facilitate is a really, really great one. So I hope that helps. We have some other questions about an open group. Absolutely. Because there's a brief review, I think we'd have to talk a little bit more about that offline. I know, Tom, we could talk about that offline. But I think the open group would require maybe just a little orientation prior to dropping into the group, because there are some sessions that build on previous sessions, like the one on strength is module 3, session 3, but then later we go back to, and I forget which session, we go back and we ask people about their strengths. So they may have to be reoriented in some way. And thinking about mixed age group, I mean, that's a very good question. I think that's always a challenge. Certainly, I don't know if Tony, you have any thoughts about mixed, facilitating a group of mixed ages, or Caitlin?
I think you can make it work. I think the more diverse the group is, generally the more challenging I think it is for the facilitator, but it certainly can work. And I think that mixed groups, in terms of age and other variables, actually add a dimension to the learning. People when they're facing challenges and stress and trauma often begin to think that they're the only people that have ever experienced these things. And there's something wonderful about recognizing the universality of both the challenges that we all face around stress and trauma and difficulty in life, as well as the universality in our ability to respond to those in a positive way. So I think there's actually some value in diversity. One of the things I would be interested in watching sometime would be delivery of this to a mixed group of staff and clients in an organization, because this is material that is also relevant in a staff context to issues like staff engagement, staff satisfaction, retention, productivity, higher levels of happiness, drive, all of that as well. So I think this has value for staff as well. And I have this fantasy about mixed groups of staff and clients in an organization, and mixed groups of facilitators, staff and clients in an organization, delivering this to those mixed groups.
Thanks, Tony. Actually, I'm gonna. Unfortunately, I think we have to keep moving on. Those are really exciting suggestions about that. Um, we do have some additional resources, as Caitlin pointed out. These are you'll be able to receive this PowerPoint and should clickable links for these materials. Um, we have a reference, and Kati, can I turn it over to you for a moment?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Zechner. Thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. We invite you to take our brief survey. You can either access the survey by scanning the QR code that you see on your screen. I also included a direct link in the chat if that's easier for you. Again, please feel free to provide your commentary as well as your feedback. And we will review so that we can improve our future products and events that we offer. Thank you.
And I just want to thank everyone so much for your rich discussions and points that you've made. Oops, someone's asked the resource page to be put up. Really appreciate the questions and thoughts. I do think we didn't address, could this be applied in school age? I think that that's a great question. I don't know the answer. We have not studied that. We're in evaluation phase and looking at this program and potential outcomes, and I think that might be a next phase to consider.
But I think that there is certainly a lot of work that's been done on applications of this in educational settings. So not this particular package and arrangement and delivery, but the core elements certainly have been looked at in the context of elementary, middle, and high school.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Right. So in a lot of, and actually the Greater Good Science Center has a section in it for educators and for use of positive psychology intervention in children. So that might be a great resource to start with. Yeah, to consider. Well, thank you very much. We're so appreciative. I think we're out of time. We're wishing you all a wonderful day. I hope you can use your strengths and notice your social networks today. I'm very grateful for all of you and for the work that you do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Zippel and Caitlin. Appreciate your time. I'm going to end the webinar now. Goodbye.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.